Hello, kitties. Today, we are delving into something different. Today, we dive into the dark and sometimes sinister world of La Cosa Nostra, the Italian mob. One certain mobster was damn near untouchable due to his intelligence, ability to read people, and though he was only 5 foot 2 inches tall, a little over 100 pounds, he was not hesitant to kill you if you were in his way. In 1910, an 11-year-old Gaetano Tommy Lucchese passed through Ellis Island, the gateway to the American dream, via Italy with his family. The family lived in a small apartment in East Harlem, an area ruled by the Italian mob and many gangsters. Tommy witnessed how easy the thugs made money and rackets while his hard-working dad damn near killed himself for mere scraps. It was around this time that Tommy Lucchese met a young Charles Lucky Luciano, who would eventually change the face of the Italian mob with Lucchese's help. They met in the 107th Street Gang, a bunch of kids pulling rackets and robbing individuals, making money any way they could. But around this time also, Lucchese was finally forced to get a job by his family. But a very bad accident cut off his thumb and a finger, leaving his hand mangled with only 3 fingers. He then went back to the 107th Street Gang, and his family, ashamed Tommy was a criminal and would shame the family, kicked Tommy out. In 1917, Tommy's first extortion racket involved a window cleaning service. He approached businesses in East Harlem. He basically stated, "Use my superior window service, or your windows could be broken repeatedly until you started using my window service." So the businesses complied. It was a lot cheaper to pay $50 to have the windows cleaned than constantly paying hundreds of dollars to have the windows fixed. With a totally criminal mindset, Lucchese was a money-making machine, bringing in money hand over foot for the 107th Street Gang and its leader, Lucky Luciano. Around the early 1920s, Lucchese and Luciano were approached by one Joseph Mazzaria, who ruled the Manhattan area of New York. Joe the Boss, as he was known, hired Luciano and Lucchese as hitmen, and they were good at their job. It was estimated Lucchese had committed over 30 hits, never seeing jail time for any one of them. A testament to his intelligence and ruthless brutality, keeping any witnesses in check. Consequently, the only jail time Tommy Lucchese ever served was he was caught stealing an expensive Packard car at the age of 22. The cops that caught him were the ones that first gave him his nickname, Three Finger Brown, after a Cubs pitcher named Mordecai Three Finger Brown. Tommy Lucchese went to Sing Sing and was right at home. And like I said, this was the only jail time Tommy Lucchese would ever see in his life. Now, Tommy Lucchese returned back to New York, and the Roaring Twenties were well in swing in New York. And so was Prohibition. Thus, crime exploded. Lucchese saw money in providing liquor to speakeasies and such. But Lucchese's boss, Joe Mazzaria, had a stranglehold on the mob in New York, trying to control everything, but would not work with other gangs or ethnic groups. To Lucchese and Luciano, this was stupid and backwards and old-fashioned. Hence, the name of the old guard became the Mustache Pete's. The other issue was Mazzaria's wanting to provide low-grade bathtub gin to sell to the boozers around the city. But Luciano and Lucchese disagreed. They wanted to supply high-end liquor to the speakeasies where the money was. And any one of the elites would buy this liquor and pay whatever cost. Lucchese and Luciano saw a lucrative deal, being able to produce a cartel, if you will, setting prices and controlling the business in New York on alcohol and any other booze. Lucchese would work with Jewish gangs and other ethnic groups. he had no issue working with them at all, and it would prove beneficial later in life. Then, in the late 1920s, a war erupted between Mazzaria and Salvador Maranzano over who would control New York. Luciano and Lucchese backed their boss, but knew that all this bloodshed was bad for business. Over 100 gangsters died on the streets of New York during this war of bosses. A plan was then set in place to stop the bloodshed, a cunning plan that was drawn up to take out the New York elite mobsters, a plan by Lucchese and Luciano. Lucchese would secretly meet with Maranzano, pledging allegiance to him in a show of espionage from the Italian gangster. Meanwhile, Luciano would take out Joe the Boss, leaving Maranzano as the head mobster. Then Lucchese would strike, taking out Maranzano, leaving the top spot open for Charles Lucky Luciano, with Lucchese basically his right-hand man. A near-perfect scheme for a hostile takeover. April 15th, 1931, as Mazzaria was eating in a restaurant, four gunmen busted in, taking out Mazzaria. He was found holding an Ace of Spades card, a bad luck sign. Now, on a side note, I wonder if this is where Don Pendleton got the idea for the Black Aces hitman for the mob in his fictional book series, The Executioner Mac Bolan. My all-time favorite book series. I have over 200 episodes myself, plus spin-offs of Phoenix Force and Able Team. But Mac Bolan, The Executioner, is about a badass ex-special forces man from Vietnam waging a one-man war on the mafia for the death of his family. An action-packed adventure, a thrill ride from book to book. I recommend anyone to read them. These books first introduced me to La Cosa Nostra. Anyway, with Mazzaria out of the picture, all that was left was Maranzano. Three men entered Maranzano's office at the Grand Central Tower, posing as IRS agents. At September 10th, 1931, they gunned down Maranzano and his unarmed bodyguards. This is when Luciano became the father of the modern mob. Luciano basically split the city into five, with five families holding different parts of the city or controlling different aspects of mob business. This basically quelled all the violence in the city between the mobsters, going back to business rather than death. Also, Luciano set up the family hierarchy of a boss, underboss, consigliere, soldier, and the soldier's associates. Lucchese was given the underboss role in the Gagliano family, opening up his rise to power. Lucchese was smart to not draw attention to himself. Instead of moving into some fancy, glitzy building in New York, he maintained a modest home in New Jersey to keep a low profile. Also, having amazing foresight, Lucchese and Luciano knew that Prohibition would end, and when it died, he had already had his hands in a business you'd never guess in a million years. Don't worry, I'll wait. Well, it was the kosher chicken business in New York. The handlers of the chicken were rabbis, and they were a basic father-son union, very specialized and almost impossible to replace. And through his Jewish connections, Lucchese got his hands on the kosher chicken union, then the kosher chicken industry in whole. He guaranteed everyone in the industry their cut of the profits, and all they had to do was cooperate, and they did, because everyone profited, and they had no reason to complain. The only one it hurt was the consumer, but Jewish people had to buy kosher chicken from kosher buyers, so they had to pay the price. He controlled every aspect of the kosher chicken business, a monopoly of sorts. Lucchese's brains, not brawn, was making him money hand over foot, but he was not satisfied. Tommy always had his eye on the future, and he was always interested in the garment business in New York City. He also had started loan sharking, and when the stock market crashed in 1929, it opened up Lucchese to charge to the forefront in loan sharking business in New York. See, Lucchese had the money to bail out every business in the garment industry in New York, and if they loaned money and they couldn't pay due to his high interest, he would take a piece or all of the business. Maybe the most lucrative loan sharking racket ever. He was grossing over $5 million a year during the Depression. He had muscled in on the garment industry. He then took over the Garment Cutters Union, basically calling the shots in the garment industry in New York City as a whole. Furthermore, he gained control of the union for the garment delivering drivers, so he now controlled every aspect of the garment industry, and he could set prices as he saw fit. But the people and businesses in the industry did not complain because he guaranteed profits to them and guaranteed protection. They always had his protection and his money to back them. Now, Tommy Lucchese's next arena was city politics. Lucchese had an invisible hand, controlling businesses, paying off cops, and any other city officials to keep his rap sheet clean. In 1945, Tommy Lucchese backed the New York City Council president, who soon became New York City's mayor. Maybe the worst mayor ever, but it was a mayor backed by Tommy Lucchese. By the early 1950s, Lucchese had been the Gagliano family's underboss for 20-something years. In February 1951, Gagliano died and Lucchese became the boss of the Gagliano family. He built a new home in a prominent area of New York. Eventually, the U.S. Senate started an investigation in the Italian crime families, but luckily, Lucchese's low profile kept him out of the Senate committee's sight and mind. But in 1952, he was called before a hearing of the New York State Crime Commission. Lucchese kept stating his Fifth Amendment rights, and the commission basically dissolved without anything hurting Lucchese. But in November 1957, in a famous event in Appalachia, New York, Lucchese was caught up in the famous meeting of the bosses that was unluckily busted up by a New York state trooper. Many mob bosses fled the house, being caught and questioned as to why they were there. This discovery confirmed the presence of an Italian crime syndicate in the U.S. Lucchese was there and he ran on foot, but it exposes Lucchese's ability to play the Wizard of Oz, so to speak. Then, in 1962, Joe Valachi broke the very serious pledge of Omerta, code of silence, telling the feds the inside of the mob, even stating the Lucchese family led by Tommy Lucchese. Meanwhile, Lucchese, as most mob bosses, underbosses and such, had their hands in the corrupt pugilistic arts, boxing. Lucchese was always involved in boxing, rigging fights for the sake of betting. Joe Carbo ran his boxing arena. Sonny Liston was actually ran by Lucchese's men. They claimed the fight was rigged between Sonny Liston and Cassius Clay when Cassius Clay won the belt. But I watched this fight many times. I myself am a fan of the pugilistic art. As a matter of fact, I have a playlist, The Golden Age of Boxing, on this channel. You should check it out. But anyway, I have seen this fight many times. There was no dive. There was just one fighter whipping the other fighter in the ring. That's all it was. No dive, period. With that being said, in the mid-1960s, Tommy's health was giving him fits. He was having headaches, chest pains, and such. He went to the doctor and was diagnosed with a brain tumor. He was given only a year to live, but defying the odds, he lived over 2 years. At the age of 68, Lucchese died at his home in New York, and on his deathbed, he stated he had no regrets in his life. He did everything his way, though he never named an official heir, so the Mafia Commission had to vote on someone to replace Tommy Lucchese. Later on, in 1976, the Lucchese crime family performed what was the biggest robbery ever at the time, the Lufthansa heist at JFK Airport, the same Lufthansa heist that is shown in the movie Goodfellas. In 1980s, Rudy Giuliani used wiretaps to hit the 5 families in New York hard, even the Lucchese family. Tommy Lucchese's life was the mold to the perfect mafioso. Sleight of hand, stay in the shadows, lay low, yet make money and command respect and fear. I do not idolize these men. They were criminals. But I give them credit where it is due, and Lucchese lived a life by the sword as the master strategist of the sword. And if Lucky Luciano was the father of the mob, then Tommy Lucchese would definitely have been its breadwinner. And this is Big Duke 6. Until next time.